Emma was in Lucas' study room, sitting in his leather reading chair, flipping through a book she had pulled from the neatly arranged shelves. The room smelled of cedarwood and old pages, a quiet sanctuary within their home. She had always admired how organized Lucas was. His financial reports, real estate contracts, and business records were all carefully stacked on his desk. Just as she was about to turn another page, her phone buzzed on the desk beside her. She glanced at the screen. Patricia, her mother-in-law. Her chest tightened. Patricia rarely called her directly. If she did, it was never for a casual chat. It was either something serious or something problematic. Emma reached for the phone, hesitating for a brief second before answering. The moment she picked up, her mother-in-law voice came through. No greetings, no pleasantries, just straightforwards to business. Emma, you need to come over this weekend. The whole family has something important to discuss. Her tone was firm, almost commanding. Emma closed the book in her lap, processing the abrupt demand. This wasn't normal. Her in-laws had never summoned her like this before. If there was an important family matter, Lucas should have been involved. Yet her mother-in-law was speaking as if he didn't exist. She took a slow breath, then stood up, walking toward Lucas, who was reviewing some work at his desk. Holding up her phone, she asked, "Did your mom tell you anything about a family meeting this weekend?" Lucas, clearly caught off guard, looked up. His forehead creased. "No. She hasn't said a word to me." Emma's stomach twisted. If this was something serious, why was Lucas, her husband, completely in the dark? And why had his mother specifically called her instead of him? "Why just me?" she pressed, keeping her voice controlled. Lucas sighed, shaking his head. "I have no idea. But if it were important, she would have told me first." Emma tightened her grip on the phone. A formal summons from a family that had never truly accepted her? Something wasn't right. Then her eyes drifted to the open financial records on Lucas's desk. For the past few days, she had been reviewing his company's transactions. A massive $500,000 had been withdrawn, but no records showed where it had gone. It wasn't a routine expense. It wasn't an investment. It had simply vanished. Her pulse quickened. Has Lucas' family been hiding something? His family members all got shares. Had mother-in-law called her to manipulate her into something? Emma took a slow, steadying breath. If this was something else or a trap, she wouldn't walk in blindly. They had no idea that she was already a step ahead. Dear friends, before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for your incredible support. My channel is so far away from reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your help means everything to me. Please hit that subscribe button below. Your support truly makes a huge difference. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for being a part of my channel journey. Now back to the story. Emma stepped into the grand living room of her in-laws' estate, immediately sensing the suffocating tension in the air. The usual forced warmth and fake pleasantries were gone, replaced by a calculated coldness. Her mother-in-law, her father-in-law, her sister-in-law, and her brother-in-law were already seated, their eyes fixed on her, as if she were walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. At the center of the coffee table sat a thick stack of legal documents, an unspoken ultimatum waiting to be delivered. Her mother-in-law, ever the composed matriarch, lifted her chin and gestured toward the papers, her voice as smooth as ever, but laced with quiet authority. "Emma, sign these. We need you to transfer ownership of the penthouse at Trump Tower, the one you and Lucas received as a wedding gift, to Daniel, your brother-in-law. He needs it for his new business venture." Emma froze, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had expected some sort of confrontation. But outright daylight robbery, disguised as a family decision? That penthouse had been a wedding gift from her parents, a symbol of love and stability as she and Lucas built their life together. And now, the very family that had never truly accepted her was demanding that she sign it away, as if she were merely a placeholder, a means to an end. Before she could respond, her father-in-law leaned forward, his tone filled with carefully constructed patience. "Emma, this is what's best for everyone. We're doing this so your husband can support his brother in a meaningful way. Your husband's business is thriving, and providing Daniel with a solid asset for his startup is the logical thing to do. With a stable foundation, both brothers can focus on growing their careers without being distracted by financial concerns. If my brother-in-law succeeds, the whole family benefits, including you and Lucas. This isn't just for him, it's for the prosperity of the entire family." Emma took a slow, steady breath, masking the storm brewing inside her. Her sister-in-law, seated like royalty on her throne, let out a soft, amused scoff. "You've already benefited from our family's wealth long enough," she sneered. "It's time you did the right thing for once." Emma turned her gaze toward her, eyes sharp as a knife. Her sister-in-law had always seen her as an outsider, someone who had married up into a family she didn't deserve. Emma had endured it for years, knowing that their approval meant nothing to her. But this wasn't about acceptance. This was a blatant attempt to strip her of what was rightfully hers. They thought she was naive. They had no idea how much she already knew. They didn't know she had been carefully reviewing financial records and discovered the missing $500,000. They didn't know she had unraveled their tangled web of deceit. After all, this wasn't just about the penthouse. This was about greed, about control, about a family that saw her as nothing more than an expendable asset. Emma looked at her in-law with patience, her voice calm yet firm. You expect me to sign this? Just like that? Her mother-in-law, convinced that Emma had been cornered, offered a practiced smile. It's just a piece of paper, dear. It's for the family. Emma's lips curled into a knowing smirk. A piece of paper. How ironic. Because she had brought her own set of documents. And unlike theirs, she carried the weight of the truth. Emma let out a hollow smile, one that carried no warmth, no amusement, just a quiet understanding of how this was all about to unfold. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, placing it deliberately on the table, right next to the legal documents mother-in-law had so confidently presented to her just moments ago. Before I sign anything, would you all mind taking a look at this first? Her voice was calm, almost polite, but the weight behind her words made the entire room still. Father-in-law hesitated for a second before reaching for the folder. The moment he opened it, his face paled. His fingers clenched the pages as his eyes darted from line to line, his breath growing uneven. What is this? His voice broke the tense silence, laced with disbelief. Mother-in-law quickly took the folder from his hands, flipping through the documents with growing alarm. Emma didn't need to look at the pages. She already knew what was in them. It was undeniable proof that sister-in-law had taken out a $300,000 loan just a week ago in Las Vegas. Not for a business venture. Not for an investment. But to cover massive gambling losses. But the worst part? The loan wasn't in her name. It was in Lucas. Emma shifted her gaze toward brother-in-law, who had been sitting in stunned silence. His lips parted slightly as realization dawned on him, his face paling with disbelief. Sarah, is this true? His voice was barely above a whisper, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sister-in-law, who had carried herself with arrogance and entitlement this entire time, suddenly looked like a cornered animal. But instead of admitting the truth, she pressed her lips together and spat out a weak, desperate defense. This has nothing to do with the house. It doesn't change the fact that Emma should sign the penthouse over to us. Emma let out a soft breath and shook her head slightly, as if amused by the sheer audacity of it all. Then with calm precision she reached into her bag again, pulled out another document, and placed it directly in front of sister-in-law. Oh, are you sure about that? Sister-in-law's entire body went rigid. Because I also have proof of exactly who forged Lucas's signature to take out that loan. A sharp silence fell over the room. Mother-in-law and father-in-law both turned to look at sister-in-law, their expressions darkening by the second. Sister-in-law's hands trembled as she stared at the papers in front of her, her face ashen and lifeless. She didn't even dare to touch them. Because she knew. She knew the truth was already out. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, the front door swung open. Lucas stepped inside. His eyes darted around, taking in the scene, the stack of documents on the table, the horrified expressions, the suffocating silence. His brow furrowed in confusion. What's going on? Nobody answered. Emma didn't take her eyes off the mother-in-law, who stood frozen, her fingers trembling slightly against the edge of the table. Father-in-law looked as if he had just been slapped, his face red with barely contained fury. Her sister-in-law had turned pale, sweat forming at her temples. Her brother-in-law sat stiffly, mouth slightly open, still trying to process what he had just learned. Lucas's gaze landed on the documents. He stepped forward, picked them up and started reading. The moment his eyes scanned the first few lines, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. A long, heavy silence stretched across the room. Then finally he spoke, his voice eerily calm, too calm. Sarah. He exhaled, still staring at the paper. You forged my signature to take out a loan? A loan for $300,000? He lifted his gaze, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that made Sarah flinch. What did you even need that kind of money for? Sister-in-law opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked desperate, searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. Lucas, please, I can explain. Lucas slammed the papers onto the table. Explain. His voice finally cracked, and for the first time since he had entered, anger seeped through. You stole from me. You used my name, my credit, and put me in debt without telling me. How do you even begin to explain that? Mother-in-law saw her chance to take control and jumped in, voice urgent and commanding. Lucas, don't listen to Emma. She's trying to turn you against us. She's twisting things. Emma let out a low laugh, shaking her head before stepping forward. She had been waiting for this moment. Oh really? You think I'm lying? Her voice was almost too gentle, but it sent a shiver through the room. She pulled out another set of documents from her bag and placed them on the table, this time directly in front of mother-in-law. Then why don't you explain this? Mother-in-law's hands twitched, but she didn't move to pick up the papers. Lucas's gaze darted from Emma to his mother, his confusion deepening. What is this? Emma turned to him, her tone sharp. It's proof that your mother withdrew $150,000 from your shared account last month. Would you like to take a guess what she did with it? Lucas blinked, as if trying to convince himself he had misheard her. Mother-in-law let out a choked sound, but she still said nothing. Emma didn't wait for her to respond. She used it to invest in Tesla stock online. Lucas' face hardened. That doesn't make any sense. She never mentioned because she lost it all. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The color drained from father-in-law's face as he turned to his wife. You did what? His voice was hoarse, filled with an anger that made even Sarah and Daniel recoil. Mother-in-law took a step back, her lips trembling. I was told it was a guaranteed profit and you got scammed, Emma finished for her. She crossed her arms. And that's why you're so desperate to get me to sign over the penthouse. Because you need to cover up your losses before Lucas finds out. Brother-in-law, who had been silent, suddenly shot up from his chair, his face a mix of shock and horror. Mom, you stole from Lucas? His voice cracked. You took his money and then tried to take their home too? Mother-in-law looked around the room as if searching for a way out. Her gaze landed on father-in-law, but he took a step back. For the first time, it seemed even he wasn't on her side. Lucas exhaled sharply, his whole body tense. He slowly turned to Emma, his voice lower now, more controlled, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. He sat down slowly, his hands gripping the edges of the chair. His mouth opened slightly, but all that came out was a whisper, broken and disbelieving. No, this can't be true. His hands trembled as he flipped through the documents again, his breath uneven. Mom, tell me this isn't real. Emma met his gaze, unwavering. It's real, Lucas. Every word of it.